The dim light of the intensive care unit spilled softly across the polished floor, reflecting the pale green glow of the monitors that marked the fragile rhythm of life in each private room. Beyond the reinforced glass door labeled room for 107, the air carried the faint scent of antiseptic mixed with the delicate fragrance of a single white rose. It was 11:47 p.m. when Leila Hartman placed the rose into the small vase beside the hospital bed. The petals caught the glow from the overhead lamp, each curve seeming impossibly pure against the sterile backdrop of the ward. The night was silent except for the mechanical symphony of ventilators and heart monitors, a rhythm that had long since woven itself into the background of her life. "Good evening, Adrian," she whispered, her voice no louder than the hum of the machines. Her fingers brushed the cool glass of the vase as she adjusted the stem. "I brought your favorite again." On the bed lay Adrian Locke, once one of the most formidable names in West Coast tech, a man whose ambition had built an empire, whose vision had reshaped how millions connected with the digital world. Now, his stillness was a quiet defiance of the life he once commanded. His coma had stretched on for 1 year, 8 months, and 12 days, but Lila had marked each of them as if they were precious beads on a string, impossible to forget. She pulled a chair closer, the familiar creak of its wheels grounding her in the ritual she had repeated countless times. From the pocket of her navy blue scrub jacket, she withdrew a worn paper back, the edges softened from use, the spine carrying the memory of her thumb pressing the same place night after night. "Tonight, we're picking up where we left off," she murmured, opening the book to a page marked by a ribbon. "Chapter 7, the part about following your dreams. I think you'd like this one." Her gaze lingered on him before she began to read. His face, framed by strands of dark hair that had grown longer in his absence from the world, seemed almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the relentless, sharp-edged man she remembered reading about in business magazines. She tried to picture him in the life before the darkness, before the twisted fate of a rainy March evening had changed everything. The world before. At 32, Adrian Locke had taken Locke Dynamics from a shaky garage startup to a billion-dollar tech giant whose headquarters rose in glass and steel above the skyline. His penthouse apartment was all clean lines and vast windows, perched so high it seemed to float above the city. From there, he had looked out at the sprawl below as if surveying territory he had conquered. He was brilliant, he was driven, and he was, by deliberate choice, alone. He had been engaged once to Vanessa Price, a striking investment banker with the ambition to match his own. Their engagement had been more a merger than a romance, calculated, efficient, mutually beneficial. They attended galas and ribbon cuttings together, the perfect picture of the power couple the media adored. But behind the photographs and polished smiles, there was a hollow space where tenderness should have been. "Love is a luxury I can't afford," Adrian once told his oldest friend, Ethan Ward, over a rare drink together. "Emotions blur judgment. Success demands focus." Ethan, who had known him since university, only shook his head. "Money can buy everything, except the things that matter." But Adrian, with that faintly amused smile that always meant the conversation was over, didn't answer. The night everything changed. It had been a Thursday evening in March, rain streaking the city streets under a canopy of flickering streetlights. Adrian was still at his office long after his staff had gone home, buried in quarterly reports and product launch schedules. It was close to midnight when he finally pushed away from his desk, the glow of his monitor still painting shadows across the room. The air outside was cold and wet, the rain coming down in silver threads. He stepped into his sleek black sedan, thoughts already running toward tomorrow's meetings. He never saw the other car. At the intersection of 5th and Alder, a drunk driver ignored the red light, headlights cutting like a blade through the rain. The collision was a violent, spinning chaos of metal and glass. Adrian's car slammed into the concrete barrier with a force that crushed steel like paper. The world went black. When emergency responders arrived, they found him unconscious, bleeding, and gasping for breath. Paramedics fought to keep him alive during the frantic rush to Metropolitan General Hospital, where Dr. Marissa Cole and her trauma team worked for hours, under the blinding lights of the operating room. "He's alive, doctor," Cole told Ethan in the small hours of the morning, exhaustion in her voice. "But his brain injury is severe. We've put him into a medical coma to prevent further swelling. We can't say when or if he'll wake." Vanessa came 3 times in the first week. Each visit was shorter than the last. By the end of the second month, she stopped entirely. "I won't waste my life waiting for someone who might never open his eyes," she told Ethan, her voice as cold as her diamond earrings. The angel who stayed. Leila Hartman had been a nurse at Metropolitan General for 5 years when Adrian Locke's broken body was wheeled into the ICU. At 28, she had seen enough suffering to know that life was rarely fair, and yet something about him struck her differently. She had read about him in magazines, seen his face in news articles. In person, stripped of his power, he seemed almost human in a way that unsettled her. She noticed, too, that once Vanessa stopped coming, only Ethan visited, and even those visits grew rare as the months stretched on. Most nights, Adrian lay alone, surrounded only by the steady blip of the heart monitor and the sighing breath of the ventilator. He shouldn't be alone, Leila thought one evening as she finished her rounds. The thought lodged itself in her mind, stubborn and unshakable. That night, she made a choice. When her shift ended, she returned to room 407. She sat beside his bed, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket, and began to talk. At first, her voice was hesitant, a stranger speaking into silence, but soon she found herself telling him about her day, her coworkers, a silly mistake she'd made as a child. She read to him from whatever book she had in her bag, unsure if any of it reached him. And then she came back the next night, and the next, and the next. The ritual of care. Weeks turned to months, and Lila's visits became an unspoken tradition. Mondays, she brought fresh flowers, white roses, blue hydrangeas, yellow daisies, each chosen with care. Tuesdays, she read poetry. Wednesdays were for adventure novels. Thursdays brought the classics, and Fridays were reserved for books about resilience and hope. On some nights, she brought her phone and played soft jazz or gentle classical music. Music can reach places words can't, she told the other nurses when they teased her for spoiling a man who couldn't hear her. Some called her the angel of room 407. Some whispered that she was too attached. Dr. Cole, however, encouraged her. "There's evidence coma patients retain auditory memories," the doctor explained. "If nothing else, you're giving him a human connection." Over time, Leila found herself sharing more than just stories and poems. She told him about her small-town Oregon childhood, about her grandmother whose battle with cancer had inspired her to become a nurse, about her dream of one day having a family. On a snowy December night, she whispered, "I never believed in love at first sight, but I think I believe in love at first care. The first moment I saw you lying here, something inside me knew I was supposed to stay." By then, his room had changed. She had brought a soft blanket from home, small framed photographs of landscapes she loved, even a potted plant that leaned toward the window. "The doctors say you might wake tomorrow, or you might sleep for years," she told him one night, resting her hand lightly over his. "But you won't be alone, not ever again." It was a crisp, sun-washed morning in late October, the kind of day when the city skyline gleamed as though it had been freshly polished. Inside the ICU, light slanted through the tall windows of room 407, brushing the walls with gold. Leila stepped into the familiar quiet, her heart unconsciously slowing to match the steady pulse of the heart monitor. She paused at the threshold. Something felt different. The air held a subtle charge, a faint hum beneath the routine stillness, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Just outside the door, Dr. Marissa Cole stood with a tablet in her hand, her dark eyes bright with a rare spark of excitement. "Leila," Marissa said quietly, beckoning her closer. "You need to see this." On the monitor, the graph of Adrian's brain activity glowed with sharp, restless peaks instead of the low, even hum Leila had grown used to. "Overnight," the doctor explained, her voice hushed but urgent, "there was a significant surge. The patterns suggest he's fighting to wake. For a heartbeat, Leela forgot to breathe. She clutched the strap of her bag until her knuckles whitened, as if anchoring herself in reality. You mean, her voice cracked. You think he's trying to come back? I can't promise anything, Marissa cautioned. But if you believe in miracles, now's the time. Leela slipped into the room, the soft soles of her shoes barely whispering against the floor. Adrian looked the same as he always had, still pale, a man frozen in the amber of time. But her instincts screamed that something invisible had shifted. She moved to her usual seat beside him, her hands steadying themselves as they arranged the fresh bouquet of white roses she'd brought. The familiar fragrance rose into the air, mingling with the antiseptic scent. "Good morning, Adrian," she whispered, though her voice trembled with something dangerously close to hope. "Your favorite's white roses. I thought they might remind you of home, or maybe just me." She reached for the book they'd been reading, The Alchemist, the pages worn from months of her voice breathing life into its words. The cover flopped open in her lap, but she didn't begin reading immediately. Instead, she studied his face, tracing every angle and shadow as though committing it to memory all over again. And then, so faint she almost thought she imagined it, his fingers moved. Leela froze, her breath caught halfway in her chest. Her gaze darted to his hand. The movement came again, this time deliberate, the slightest flex of muscle, the barest twitch of life. She swallowed hard, afraid that if she spoke too loudly, the moment might dissolve like mist. Her pulse roared in her ears as she leaned forward. Adrian, slowly, achingly, like a diver ascending from the depths. His eyelids began to lift. The light in the room caught the green of his irises as they blinked against the brightness, and focused at first, and then, impossibly, they found hers. A faint, weary smile touched his lips. "Leela," he rasped, his voice rough from 2 years of silence. His gaze didn't waver. You're the angel who's been calling me home." Her hand flew to her mouth, but the sob that escaped was part laugh, part relief, and wholly beyond her control. Tears blurred her vision, but she reached for his hand, holding it between both of hers. "You can't," her voice broke. She swallowed, tried again. "You can't know what this means." "I do," he murmured, his thumb making a slow, trembling stroke against her skin. "I heard you. Every word, every story, every song. You kept me anchored when I wanted to let go." Her shoulders shook as the truth of it hit her. All those nights of speaking into the quiet, all those hours wondering if she was just talking to herself. He had been there, in some deep, unreachable place, and she had been his tether. "Doctor," Cole entered then, her professional composure cracking into an astonished smile. Nurses followed, bustling to check vitals, adjust monitors, and run preliminary tests. But through it all, Adrian's eyes never left Lila's face. The days after, in the 3 days that followed, Room 407 transformed from a quiet sanctuary into the center of a whirlwind. Specialists came and went, neurologists and physical therapists rotating through, their conversations a blur of medical jargon. The media caught wind of the story, the brilliant tech mogul waking from a 2-year coma, and reporters gathered outside the hospital, their cameras poised. Lock Dynamics stock prices surged, investors calling it a sign that their visionary leader had returned. But none of that seemed to matter to Adrian. In rare moments of quiet, he would speak with Leela in low, careful tones, his voice still regaining its strength. "I remember you reading me that poem," he said one evening, his gaze distant in thought. "The one about the lighthouse, a sailor finding his way home through the storm." Lila's breath caught. She had read that poem only once, 8 months earlier, on a night when his vitals had wavered dangerously and fear had gripped her so hard it hurt to breathe. She'd chosen it instinctively, her voice breaking at the final verse. And he had remembered. "You gave me something to fight for," he said, his eyes fixed on hers. "In that place between sleeping and dying, your voice was the only light." Her hand lingered over his, absorbing the warmth of his skin, the steady reality of his presence. She wanted to tell him what his words meant to her, but the lump in her throat made speech impossible. The shadow at the door, on the morning of the 7th day after Adrian woke, Leela walked into room 407 to find she wasn't alone. By the bed stood a tall woman in a tailored suit, her jet black hair pulled into a severe twist, her lipstick a sharp slash of crimson. Her cool blue eyes swept the room with the same precision as an appraiser examining a priceless artifact. "So, you're the nurse?" the woman said, her tone making the words sound like an insult. Leela didn't need an introduction. This had to be Vanessa Price, the woman Adrian had once been engaged to. She'd heard the name in passing from him, always in a tone edged with disappointment. Adrian's jaw tightened the moment he saw her. "Vanessa," he said evenly. "I didn't expect you. I came as soon as I heard," she replied, finally turning to acknowledge Leela with a dismissive glance. "We need to speak privately. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Leela," Adrian said, his voice suddenly harder. "She's the reason I'm alive." Vanessa's laugh was cold and humorless. How touching. But this isn't about sentiment. This is about business. Vanessa's presence in the room felt like a cold draft, an intrusion on the fragile warmth that had been growing between Adrian and Leela. She set a slim leather portfolio on the bedside table with the precision of someone placing a chess piece, deliberate, calculated. "While you were indisposed," she began, her gaze sliding back to Adrian with a practiced softness that rang false, "I made some difficult decisions to protect our interests." Adrian's brows drew together. "Our interests?" His voice held an edge. She gave a faint smile, the kind a corporate predator offers right before swallowing its prey. "Yes, at the time of your accident, I was still listed as your emergency contact and medical power of attorney. You never updated the paperwork after our engagement ended." The words hit Leela like a splash of ice water. Her eyes flicked to Adrian, who was already sitting up a fraction straighter, his expression sharpening. "I used that authority," Vanessa continued smoothly, "to keep lock dynamics stable in your absence. I restructured contracts, renegotiated partnerships. The board grew accustomed to my leadership. They value my steady hand." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "So steady you managed to convince them I might not be mentally fit to return." Vanessa's gaze shifted just slightly toward Leela, and there was something almost predatory in the tilt of her smile. "It's not just your health that concerns them, Adrian. It's your distractions." The implication was immediate and heavy. Leela's stomach knotted, a warning instinct tightening every muscle. "What distractions?" Adrian demanded, Vanessa's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "Your obvious infatuation with your nurse. The board worries your judgment is clouded, that you're vulnerable to misplaced loyalties after such a traumatic brain injury." Lila's hands curled in her lap, her pulse thudded painfully in her ears. It wasn't just an insult, it was a weapon, sharpened and aimed squarely at both of them. A threat with teeth. "The hospital administration is already concerned," Vanessa went on, her tone light, almost conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. "And nurse romantically involved with a patient violates multiple ethical guidelines. It could lead to her dismissal, perhaps even the loss of her license." Leela kept her face still, but inside, her breath was quick and shallow. She had known, in some distant part of her mind, that her connection to Adrian might have professional consequences. Hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it used as a bargaining chip, made her feel as though the floor beneath her had shifted. Vanessa smoothed the front of her suit jacket and leaned in slightly toward Adrian. "The board meets tomorrow to discuss your competency. If you were to distance yourself from certain inappropriate relationships and focus solely on your recovery, they might be inclined to welcome you back as CEO." Adrian's voice was low and dangerous. "You're threatening Leela." "I'm protecting everyone's interests," she replied without a flicker of guilt, including hers. Leela's mind was astorm, the months of quiet devotion, the nights reading by the dim bedside lamp, the whispered promises that he would never be alone, all of it now reframed as ammunition for someone else's power grab. She wanted to speak, to tell Vanessa that her love wasn't a liability, but the words caught in her throat. Vanessa straightened, gathering her documents with crisp efficiency. "Think about it, Adrian. This is impersonal. It's business. Everyone wins if you make the right choice." And with that, she left, her heels clicking down the corridor like the ticking of a clock. The impossible choice. Silence pulled in the room after the door closed. Leela sat rigid, staring at her hands in her lap. The faint beep of the heart monitor was the only sound. "She's right about one thing," Leela said finally, her voice a quiet thread in the stillness. "I crossed professional boundaries. I could lose my license." Adrian reached for her hand, his grip far stronger than she expected from a man only days out of a 2-year coma. "Leela," he said, and there was an urgency in his tone that made her look up. "Do you think I care about any of that?" She searched his face, seeing not the CEO who had once ruled from a penthouse, not the patient she tended to night after night, but the man who had come back to life because of her. And he looked at her as if she were the only thing in the room worth fighting for. "I spent my whole life before the accident chasing success and keeping people at arm's length," he said. "I thought caring made you weak, but in the darkness, with nothing left but the sound of your voice, I realized I'd been wrong about everything." His thumb brushed her knuckles. "You didn't just save me, Leela. You taught me how to live, and I will not let her or anyone take that away from us." The fight takes shape. Over the next 2 days, Adrian met privately with Ethan Ward, his oldest friend and now his attorney. Leela sat quietly through their conversations. The words shareholder confidence, contract restructuring, and power of attorney abuse drifting past her like foreign currency she had no means of spending. "She's been clever," Ethan admitted, sliding a folder across the table to Adrian. "The board's genuinely uncertain about your readiness." So fear he caught himself and corrected. "Vanessa has had 2 years to position herself as indispensable." Adrian's jaw was set. "Then we have to prove she isn't." Ethan gave a grim nod. "It's going to get ugly, but we can fight this." That night, after the lawyers had gone and the room was again cloaked in the muted quiet of the ICU, Leela stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Her decision had crystallized in the hours since Vanessa's visit. "I'm going to request a transfer," she said without turning round. Adrian's voice was sharp. "No, it will show the board you're thinking rationally, that you can separate your personal life from the company. It's the right move." "It's a sacrifice," he said. "It's necessary," she replied, blinking hard to keep the tears from falling. "I can't be the reason you lose everything you've built." She started toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "Do you remember what you used to tell me?" he asked. "That the bravest thing a person can do is not give up, even when it feels hopeless." Her breath caught. "Well," he said, his tone steady as iron, "I'm not giving up on us. Tomorrow, when I face that board, I'm telling them the truth that you saved my life, that I love you, and if they can't see the value in that kind of loyalty, they don't deserve to run my company." The next morning, the air in Lock Dynamics headquarters felt heavy, as if the glass walls and steel beams themselves were bracing for impact. The top-floor conference room stretched the length of the building, its panoramic view of the city framed by sleek blinds that were half-drawn against the late autumn glare. 12 directors sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions as unreadable as carved stone. Some leaned back in their chairs with arms crossed. Others tapped pens against notepads, their eyes flitting between reports and their watch faces. At the far end of the table, Robert Kincaid, the chairman, adjusted his glasses and kept his hands neatly folded. Vanessa sat to Adrian's immediate right, playing the role of concerned partner to perfection. She wore a deep navy suit and an air of quiet ownership, as though she had already claimed the head seat for herself. Beyond the glass wall, just outside the conference room, Leela stood with her back pressed lightly against the Carter's cold paneling. Through the glass, she could see Adrian poised, collected, a man rebuilt from the inside out. Her heart was thudding, but she forced herself to watch. The speech. Adrian rose slowly, deliberately, letting the room settle into silence before he spoke. 2 years ago, he began, his voice even but carrying the weight of hard-earned truth. "I was in a car accident that nearly killed me. I spent 22 months in a coma. By every medical expectation, I shouldn't be standing here today." Several of the board members shifted, their eyes narrowing with guarded curiosity. I didn't wake up because of luck, Adrian continued. I didn't come back because of medical science alone. I came back because someone refused to give up on me. He turned his head slightly toward the glass wall, his gaze finding Lila's through the faint reflection. Lila Hartman sat beside my bed every night for almost 2 years. She read to me. She talked to me. She believed in me when everyone else had walked away. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her pen, the faintest strain breaking her composed mask. Some of you have been told, Adrian said, looking back to the board, that my feelings for her are a sign of compromised judgment. I believe the opposite. Recognizing and valuing loyalty, dedication, and love is not weakness, it's strength. And it will make me a better leader than I have ever been. Shifting currents, the words seemed to ripple through the room, unsettling the still water of corporate reserve. One director, a silver-haired woman with sharp green eyes, glanced toward another board member and murmured something under her breath. A man in a gray suit who had been frowning now studied Adrian more closely, as if reassessing. This company was built on values, Adrian said, his voice deepening. Innovation, yes, but also loyalty, courage, the willingness to stand by what's right, even when it's difficult. If you cannot see the value in the kind of commitment Lila showed me, then I have to wonder whose judgment is truly in question. He didn't sit down. He let the statement hang there, giving each director the chance to weigh the challenge, the verdict, and the twist. The silence that followed stretched like drawn wire. Finally, Chairman Kincaid cleared his throat. Mr. Locke, he said, your recovery is remarkable, and your dedication to this company is beyond dispute. However, the board must also consider the practical implications of leadership during a transitional period. From the corner of her eye, Lila saw Vanessa's lips curl into the barest hint of a smile. The board has decided, Kincaid continued, to postpone any leadership changes for 30 days. During that time, we will conduct a comprehensive review of the company's structure and your medical status. A murmur swept through the table. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. And what exactly does that mean? It means, Kincaid said, that we expect you to focus entirely on your recovery and rehabilitation. No distractions. The message was unmistakable. Lila was the distraction. The corridor clash. When the meeting adjourned, Vanessa didn't waste a moment. She caught Lila just as she was stepping away from the glass wall. I hope you understand now, Vanessa said, her tone drenched in false warmth. This is impersonal. Adrian needs to focus on what's important, and you're not that. Lila lifted her chin, meeting Vanessa's gaze squarely. You think love doesn't matter, that it can't build anything worth keeping. Vanessa's laugh was quiet and razor sharp. Love doesn't pay salaries. It doesn't hold stock value. I'm offering him his empire back. All he has to do is make the right choice. And if he doesn't choose you, Lila asked, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest, then he'll lose everything, Vanessa said, stepping closer. The company, his fortune, and you'll still be just a nurse who couldn't keep her place. That evening, back in the quiet of room 407, Adrian sat by the window while the city's lights shimmered far below. When Vanessa came to him, her voice was soft, her posture calculated to suggest familiarity. 30 days, she said, as if speaking to a confidant. That's generous. You need stability, and you need someone who understands your world. Adrian didn't look at her. We were never good together, Vanessa. We were just good at pretending. Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. You're going to throw away everything for a fantasy? A nurse who got too attached. He turned then, meeting her gaze without flinching. She stayed when I had nothing to give her. That's the difference between love and a business arrangement. The message came just before noon, slipped discreetly into Lila's hand by one of the charge nurses. Patricia Williams, hospital administrator, please report to my office at 2 p.m. The words felt heavier than paper should. Lila read them twice, the quiet of the ICU pressing in around her. She already knew what this was about. Vanessa's parting threat had not been idle. At exactly 2 o'clock, she stepped into the administrator's office. The blinds were half drawn, muting the sunlight into pale stripes across the carpet. Patricia Williams sat behind her desk, hands folded over a slim file. Her expression was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. "Miss Hartman," Patricia began, "you've been with Metropolitan General for 5 years. Your record is exemplary. Your dedication to patient care has been noticed and appreciated." Leela sat still, her hands clasped in her lap. She could hear the unspoken, but before Patricia even said it. However, Patricia continued, opening the file. "Concerns have been raised by the Board of Lock Dynamics regarding your relationship with Mr. Locke. They believe your emotional involvement may have compromised your professional judgment." Lila's voice was steady, but quiet. "My care for Adrian saved his life." Patricia's brow softened, but she didn't waver. "Perhaps, but perception matters in our profession. The nursing board has been informed, and they are considering a formal investigation into possible ethical violations." The words landed like a verdict. Leela could see the outcome already: her license in jeopardy, her career in ruins. "The choice, I'm prepared to offer you an alternative," Patricia said, her voice measured. "You can request a transfer to another hospital across the country. You would leave here with a clean record and excellent references. Or you can stay and face the investigation with the risk of suspension." Lila's chest felt tight, her pulse a dull throb in her ears. The choice was no choice at all. One path meant losing Adrian. The other meant losing the work that defined her, the work that had given her purpose long before his accident. "I need time to think," she said finally. Patricia nodded once. "You have until the end of the week." The breakthrough. That evening, while Leela was still replaying every word of the meeting in her mind, Ethan Ward arrived at the hospital unannounced. He carried a thick folder, his expression sharper than Leela had ever seen. "Adrian," Ethan said the moment he entered room 407, "you need to see this." Adrian set aside the book Leela had left on the windowsill, a well-loved collection of poetry, and took the folder. Inside were financial records, bank statements, and printed email exchanges. "Vanessa didn't just use your power of attorney to restructure the company," Ethan said, pacing as he spoke. "She's been siphoning funds into shell corporations she controls. More than $12 million over the last 2 years. Adrian flipped through the documents, his eyes hardening with each page. "She's been stealing." "Not just stealing," Ethan said. "She's been building a case to have you declared permanently unfit to run Lock Dynamics. The whole questioning your competency routine. It's not about your recovery or Leela. It's about setting the stage to take full control." Leela stood frozen by the door, the pieces falling into place in her mind. Vanessa's threats, the board's hesitation, Patricia's summons, it had all been part of a larger strategy. A shift in the air. Adrian's jaw tightened, but there was a controlled fire in his eyes now. "Do we have enough to take this to the board?" Ethan's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "More than enough. Embezzlement, fraud, abuse of fiduciary duty. We can prove she's been manipulating them from the start." Leela stepped closer, searching Adrian's face. This could end it. Not just for her, but for us." His gaze softened for a moment, the steel in him giving way to something warmer. "Leela, ending it for her isn't what matters to me. Ending it for us, that's the point. The call to battle." The next morning, Adrian instructed Ethan to arrange an emergency board meeting. Both Vanessa and Leela were to be present, though neither was told why. When the time came, the conference room was already thick with tension. Adrian entered first, moving with deliberate steadiness, the faintest echo of his recent recovery in his gait. Leela took a seat along the back wall, heart pounding. Vanessa arrived a few minutes later, fashionably late, her confidence radiating like perfume. She slid into the chair beside Adrian, entirely unaware that the ground beneath her was about to give way. The boardroom was silent except for the faint tick of the antique wall clock. 12 directors sat in their seats, peepers neatly ranged in front of them, their eyes shifting between Adrian, Ethan, and the woman seated confidently at Adrian's right. Vanessa Price looked impeccable, as always. Her fitted charcoal suit was paired with a silk blouse the color of champagne. Her hair pulled into a smooth knot at the nape of her neck. She radiated the calm authority of someone who believed the game was already won. From her chair along the back wall, Leela sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap. She could feel the current of anticipation in the room below, invisible hum before a lightning strike. Adrian stood at the head of the table. His voice was clear, steady, and carried the kind of weight that demanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I called this meeting because during my recovery, I learned some deeply troubling information about the management of lock dynamics while I was incapacitated." Vanessa turned toward him slightly, her brows lifting in an imitation of polite curiosity. "Adrian, I'm sure anything you're concerned about can be explained." "It can," he interrupted, "but not in the way you think." He nodded toward Ethan. "The evidence." Ethan stepped forward, distributing thick packets of documents to each director. The crisp shuffle of papers filled the room. "What you're looking at," Adrian said, "is evidence of systematic embezzlement and fraud committed by someone this company trusted, someone sitting in this room." Vanessa's smile froze, but she quickly recovered. "This is absurd. These are financial records showing over $12 million diverted from company accounts into shell corporations you control," Adrian said, his tone flat and unyielding. "There are also false lease agreements, fabricated consulting fees, and transfers to entities that don't exist." The silence was immediate and total, broken only by the sound of a director flipping pages. "The unmasking." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "These are legitimate restructuring costs. Every decision I made was for the good of Lock Dynamics." Adrian stepped closer to her end of the table, then explained the $2 million consulting fee paid to a non-existent firm, or the lease on a property we never occupied, or the bank transfers that ended up in an account registered under your middle name. Her lips parted, but no words came. "The truth," Adrian continued, "is that while you claim to be protecting my interests, you are dismantling them piece by piece to set yourself up for complete control." A murmur rippled through the directors. One of them, a silver-haired man who had been Vanessa's ally in previous meetings, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable now. The collapse. For a moment, Vanessa tried to hold her ground. "You're making a mistake, Adrian. You're letting your fixation cloud your judgment. Your nurse has compromised you." "This isn't about Leela," Adrian cut in, his voice rising just enough to silence the room. "This is about your betrayal, about stealing from the company I built, and manipulating the board with lies." He turned toward the directors. "You asked for proof of my competency. I'm giving it to you not by defending myself, but by defending this company from the real threat." Vanessa's mask slipped then, her composure cracking in the quiet. She glanced around the table, seeking an ally, but found only cold, assessing stares. The verdict, the chairman cleared his throat. "The evidence presented is compelling, effective immediately, Ms. Price. You are removed from any position of authority within Lock Dynamics. The board will refer these findings to the appropriate legal authorities." The words landed like a gavel strike. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice low but audible. "Your obsession with her will destroy you. You'll never be the leader you were." Adrian looked at her, not with anger, but with something that might have been pity. "You're right about one thing, Vanessa. I'll never be the leader I was. I'll be better." The aftermath. Security arrived to escort her from the building. As Vanessa passed Leela, their eyes met briefly. There was no triumph in Lila's expression, only quiet certainty. Vanessa looked away first. When the boardroom emptied, Leela stepped forward. "It's over," she said softly, almost as if she didn't dare believe it. Adrian reached for her hands, his grip warm and sure. "It's over. And now, we don't have to choose between us and the company. We get both." For a moment, they stood in the quiet room, the city skyline stretching out behind them, the worst of the storm finally behind them, or so it seemed. The city was just beginning to soften into spring when Leela stepped into the familiar hallway of the ICU. 6 months had passed since that decisive boardroom confrontation, And while life had changed in ways she could never have imagined, one thing remained constant. Room 407. She found the door open, light spilling out in a warm, golden pool. Inside, the room looked nothing like it had during the long years of Adrian's coma. The stark hospital furniture had been replaced by soft lamplight, a scattering of white candles, and a vase brimming with fresh white roses, the same flowers she had brought him every Monday, without fail. Adrian was standing near the window, wearing a dark suit that fit him like it had been made for him, which, knowing him, it probably had. But it wasn't the suit or the setting that made Lila's breath catch. It was the way he looked at her, as though she had just stepped into his world for the first time all over again. "This is where you saved my life," he said quietly, "and where you taught me that love isn't a weakness, it's the strongest force there is." He crossed the room slowly, then lowered himself to one knee beside the bed where he had once lain, unmoving. From his jacket pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. "Lila Hartman," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you loved me when I couldn't love you back. You stayed when everyone else walked away. You believed in me when I had nothing to give. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to love you as completely as you loved me?" Her answer came through a rush of tears. "Yes," she whispered, then again, stronger. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." As he slid the ring onto her finger, the room seemed to hold its breath, the same room where their love had begun as a quiet vigil and grown into something unshakable. 1 year later, the rooftop garden at Metropolitan General was dressed for celebration, the air scented with blooming jasmine and the faint salt tang of the city breeze. Rows of white chairs faced an arch woven with white roses, the late afternoon sun casting long, warm shadows. It was a small wedding, only those who had walked with them through the storm. Dr. Marissa Cole stood beside Lila in a pale green dress, her eyes bright with pride. Ethan, who had never once stopped believing in Adrian, walked him down the aisle. Lila wore a simple white gown, her bouquet a cluster of white roses bound with a satin ribbon. Adrian's suit was soft gray, a single white rose in his lapel. When they spoke their vows, there was no tremor in their voices, only the quiet certainty of two people who had already proven what in sickness and in health truly meant. "You taught me," Adrian said, "that love is something to be grateful for, to nurture, and to protect. You loved me back to life, and I promise to spend every day loving you forward into whatever comes next." "Adrian," Lila replied, "you taught me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply stay. Stay present, stay hopeful, stay faithful to love, even when it seems impossible. I stayed with you in the darkness, and now I get to stay with you in the light." When they kissed, the city below glowed in the light of the setting sun, as if the world itself was honoring their triumph. 5 years later, the garden at home, the laughter of children drifted through the air, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves. In the back garden of their home, 4-year-old Hope sat cross-legged on the grass, carefully arranging white roses in a small vase. Nearby, her twin sister Faith chased butterflies through the lavender bushes, her delighted squeals ringing out like bells. On the garden swing beneath the old oak tree, Lila leaned against Adrian's shoulder. The evening light painted everything in gold. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't stayed that first night?" he asked, watching their daughters play. Lila smiled softly. "Sometimes, but then I remember that some things are meant to be. I was meant to be there. You were meant to come back. We were meant to find each other." He kissed the top of her head, breathing in the faint scent of jasmine from the fence line. "The doctors still call it a miracle," she said, "but I know the truth. Love is always a miracle. You just have to be brave enough to believe in it." In the distance, Hope's voice carried over the garden. "Mama, look, the roses are just like the ones in your wedding pictures." Lila laughed, her joy ringing across the yard. "Yes, sweetheart, white roses mean new beginnings and love that lasts forever." Adrian squeezed her hand, remembering every Monday morning she had walked into room 407 with a fresh bouquet, never knowing she was planting the seeds of their forever. Some love stories begin with fireworks. Others begin with a quiet act of faith. Theirs had begun with a whisper in the dark and had grown into a symphony that would play for the rest of their lives.